introduce themselves and then to take it over from there. Thank you again and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Mate. So if I start, maybe my name is Eimear Nivrin. So I've been working on communicating the EU and what it does in Ireland for the past 20 years, and now I have moved here to Brussels. But the main job I had for the past 5 or 6 years was Language Affairs Officer for the European Commission in Ireland. So I'm going to share my screen. I will start, and then I'll hand over to David, who will do his part of the presentation. So we just want to share, I suppose, 2 of the projects we've been doing, working with teenagers in particular, or with young people, and to see if these are things that might give you ideas or inspire you, or maybe you might have opinions about them yourselves. So I suppose just to say one word about Ireland itself, because the context is particularly important. It's not the only EU country that has more than one language, but just to say that the fact that we had 2 languages meant that when I started this job of trying to encourage people to look at multilingualism and translation in Ireland, the idea of working with 2 languages meant that they were 2 separate projects in some ways, so trying to bring them together. Most people don't know that despite the fact that English is the main language that you hear on the streets in Ireland, Irish is the most important one in the Constitution, which is why then the status at EU level changed. But that required us to then look at how we were promoting the career of translation and looking at translating in the European Union. The government also has a foreign languages strategy, relatively recent, this particular one, but looking at improving foreign languages and the learning of foreign languages in Ireland. We're not exactly known for our abilities in that area, because I suppose English is something we can use as we travel, but it's something that the government is working quite a lot on. And you've a lot of bodies, agencies, university lecturers, teachers who are really working very hard to try and change the situation in Ireland. And another part of the context is that relatively recently, what are called heritage languages have become a key factor then as well, in that students in Irish schools and in Irish universities are exposed to many more languages, and students who are learning different languages at home. This has changed attitudes to multilingualism, or is changing attitudes towards multilingualism, and the career of translation then becomes something that people can, and interpreting, they become careers that people can identify with. Finally, I suppose Brexit, we have to mention it. It did mean that Ireland, and Malta as well, that Ireland became quite an important country for the English language as well, for recruiting people with English. So, as I mentioned, the reality of linguistic skills was something we had to deal with. So how do we look at encouraging school students who don't have exposure to a lot of languages, because many of them can only learn one foreign language, some can learn 2, but what can we do about encouraging them to take ownership of their own language journey? What can we do outside of school? How can we encourage them to look beyond that?
Sorry,
and then I suppose
are you meant to show just the first slide, because David?
I should be on the next one.
Okay, so probably you're not doing it properly then, David. Just
we're
just saying
everybody.
your first.
Okay, well, I stop sharing and see if I can go again. Mate, you have my presentation too, don't you?
Actually, it's David probably better to share that, because he knows how to do it properly.
David, would you mind, given that I'm doing it wrong? But I can go on, maybe, just so that just because this is, I suppose, the main thing. I don't want to waste everybody's time. Just, I suppose, the in terms of finishing that context part. So we were looking at not only encouraging people to look at how they could boost their language learning, but also showing them what they could do with them in the outside world. And one of those things, as we know, is about career opportunities and about careers with languages, something that in the EU institutions we were very keen on. So these were the types of things. This is the context and why we decided in Ireland to try and think outside the box a little bit, okay? So I suppose moving on to, I'm on slide 4, David, if that helps at all. Moving on to what did we do? So we had a couple of steps. We had to start very much from the beginning. So the first was looking at speaking to schools themselves. and universities, but to schools about these things, about the benefits of multilingualism and career opportunities. We found it wasn't just about speaking to the students, but also about the teachers. It's something we mentioned in the blurb for this session. The teachers were then coming back to us with questions, because I suppose they were encouraged and inspired by what could be done with languages outside. But we also had to develop, and it's something that a lot of people in our line of work, we had to develop this network of partners, because there were so many people, like university lecturers, organizations working on languages, so many of them who are actually doing work in this area. So it was trying to build that network and work together. And we decided, when it comes to secondary schools, we decided that we would develop workshops and try school students, not just an opportunity to hear from us, but an opportunity to try it for themselves, because there's nothing quite like that. Instead of us lecturing them or talking at them, that we were trying to get them to look at texts and look at the different ideas. And this is where we went in Ireland. And then we used those workshops to promote, obviously, the translation competitions that you've heard of, the ones that the Commission organises, so Jóvenes Translatores, and in Ireland a special one for secondary school students focusing on the Irish language, one that we do with the government. Okay, so as I mentioned, I don't know if you can see my presentation at this stage, and apologies again for doing it wrong. Perhaps somebody could...
David is doing a great job, so just...
Thank you, David. So I'm on the next slide. So the school visits then, this is just an idea of what we do. So we do them in the European Union, in the European Commission's representation in Ireland, but also we went to schools and then we did them online. So a couple of different approaches to it. But the main thing was that we used a mix depending on the language level, and the students we were speaking to. So we did things like the presentations, we did little trials of translation tests, we did whispering competitions to look at interpreting, and we used versions of multilingual quizzes, all of which were aimed to engage with whatever group of students we had. We also visited schools during their careers nights as well, which is something that we benefited a lot from. I mean, these things take a lot of work, but they seemed to be worth it, because these people, the students then, are moving on to apply for the university courses. So on the next slide, David, thank you, the workshops themselves, as I said, it was all about letting the students try it for themselves. You can see a couple of examples there where we brought our real-life translators, and the universities opened their computer labs to us, so that the students could actually try it on computers with the translators working around. And the translators enjoyed this very much as well, because some of the students came up with solutions that they themselves would not have seen. It was really interesting as a creative process, so it went both ways, and it's something that has become quite popular now. Our waiting lists for these workshops are quite long. We do about 2 to 3 each year, but again, just bearing in mind, we're dealing with multiple languages. So for the ones into English, we offer at the moment French, German and Spanish. For the ones into Irish, we're focusing mainly on English, but trying to broaden it out to French. But it's something that the principle is always the same, just giving them a chance to see what they can do. And we've done this verbally as well, where we get students, a big group of students, to sort of shout out solutions for different things when we're visiting schools for shorter periods. So definitely well worth it as a way of doing things. The competitions, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Jóvenes Translatores competition, and Ashtrahor Yoga, or Young Translators, is that Irish language version I was referring to. So I suppose the reason I've put this in here is just to say that what we are seeing as a result of the time we've spent in the schools is that there is an increase in people applying for these competitions. And this is, I suppose, where it becomes worth it, where you see in the questions that we get about careers. So if we move on just to slide 8 there, before I finish, just one thing about third level. I mean, again, the same types of things, manning career stands, doing presentations and doing more advanced workshops. But I suppose the challenge all the time, so bringing it back at the end there to the challenge that it's about in Ireland, ensuring that they have the linguistic proficiency, that they have the level of the language ready to be able to apply, okay? So as I say, the last slide there, it really is, there is good news, but this is the tip of the iceberg. And it's not just about keeping the momentum going, it's about being creative and in these contexts, sharing ideas, getting ideas from each other. So David's solution, or David's approach, is the next idea. And these are just two ideas, two solutions for trying to engage with young people. And we'll be interested to hear your questions and comments afterwards. Thank you. And apologies again for the technical mix-up.
Thank you, Eimear. No worries for technical issues. David got you covered. And David, I leave the floor to you. You're muted just by default. So, okay. We don't hear you, David. Maybe you should. We still don't hear you. Maybe you should unmute on your computer as well. No, we don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's fine. Now it's fine.
Okay, very good. So, good morning, everyone. I'm going to be speaking about a project called Tratra, which was a translation summer school. Like Eimear and like most field officers, my part of our job is visiting schools, speaking to them about translation, speaking to them about multilingualism, and so on. As many people will tell you, or if you've worked with young people yourselves, it is not always easy to find a group that is engaged, because if you have a mixed group, you'll have people who are interested and engaged, you have other people who are not interested and would rather be doing anything else. So since as translators, we try to get people to discover translation, I thought, okay, how can we get the students who are really interested in translation and get them to try translation at a much younger age? So first of all, I should mention a few things. For very small, much smaller than Ireland, there is only one university. Well, one university and only one translation course. So resources are very, very limited. And so a translation summer school introduces participants to translation in a fun, informal setting, away from academic pressure. So one important distinction, that this is not a competition. Actually, we try to emphasize collaboration in our workshop. Secondly, we noticed that while some schools have the time, the resources, perhaps teachers who are ready to take the initiative to set up translation workshops with students, not everyone has that. And since Malta is a small country, there's a small catchment area, it is actually feasible to set up a centralized workshop for teenagers to do this. And it gives them more time to dig deeper and discuss along with peers. This was a 4-day summer translation camp or summer school. We met from 10 to 4 every day for 4 days, and I'll be showing you the program later. And one crucial point is that participation is voluntary. So you're only getting people who are interested. So it was planned in 4 half days from 10 to 2. It started off with a presentation from a translator in a certain field. So we had people speaking about general translation, the general principles of translation, prose, poetry, and audiovisual, which is one of the fields which is one of the burgeoning fields of translation. We had a few specific exercises on translation-related skills, like revision, very useful today in the time of machine translation, editing, using a dictionary. And one important component was each day finished with individual practice. So students chose a text to translate, and we were 3 tutors, and we were there available to help them and discuss ideas together, even in a group. So there was a big emphasis on discussion in this group. So this is the poetry workshop, for example. It was a combination of a presentation with examples being given, which was It turned out to be the best practice, giving a presentation and also giving examples. And this was the audiovisual presentation. There were representatives from an association of audiovisual translators in Malta. So what worked? The design of the program worked. Having a smaller group worked. So we had 14 participants and we were 3 tutors. And it gave us a good room for maneuver. The fact that we were a diverse group of tutors, there was myself and there were 2 lecturers. One of them lectures in Maltese, the other one in English. We all brought something different to the table, and we were also able to draw from our own professional and life experience to discuss certain topics, because, as you know, translation requires as well some kind of general knowledge, not just language knowledge. The fact that it was a voluntary thing, that students applied for something and they were ready to come for it, made a big difference. And it also made it possible for people to go in much deeper into topics than they would normally in class. Now, in terms of marketing the activity, what worked the best was mentioning the activity during school visits, during Juvenes Translatores activities, and through teachers. One point that is relevant for Malta, but I'm also sure that it's relevant for other countries, is that we timed the event to be accessible for people who live on the other island. So we started at 10, which you're thinking, okay, this is perhaps a trivial point, but I think if we had started an hour earlier, students from Gozo, who were actually really promising and really engaged, would not have been able to make it on time because they need to catch a ferry to come to Valletta. So accessibility in terms of public transport, in terms of timing, is also something that we need to take care of. Now, room for improvement. Some exercises were too ambitious, so perhaps shorter exercises, more contained, make more sense to allow proper time for discussion. We thought that being shown examples during presentations and asking students to take ownership of the problem makes more sense. It would make more sense to have the individual texts that they're going to be translating be vetted before by the course leaders and give them and for students to be presented with a smaller selection of texts, and possibly texts that have already been translated so that they can compare their translation to it. And many students expressed a wish to have more time to practice. Now, the way forward is we'd like to have some follow-up workshops for this year's cohort on individual topics, for example, a 2-hour poetry translation workshop. Hopefully as well, we'll be able to do Tratra too for the same age group, or perhaps for a slightly older group, because in Malta, translation isn't really studied until a postgraduate level. And we think that Tratra can possibly be replicated in other member states using the same format. One very important thing I would like to mention is that we did not really specifically speak about EU careers or about translating for the EU. Why not? I feel that at that age, what you really want to do is nurture the love for language and the interest in translation, and see the fun aspects of it, see the problem-solving aspect, and so on. Because that will keep students interested in translation, and perhaps also through extracurricular activities, and just keep them interested in translation. And then if the opportunity for them to for an institution comes, they'll to pick it up. But it's a bit hard to predict what translation marketplace is going to look like in 5 years when these people will graduate. So I would rather instill a love of translation, start training people into what makes a good translation, how to go about translating, and then once the opportunities arise, they can rise to the opportunity. And one thing that really made me happy was at the end, one of the students who had studied languages for the past 2 years, because I finally found my people, I found my tribe, the people who are really interested in language and just want to discuss it. And so hopefully this kind can also build a community of peers who will go on and work in translation, work in literature, work in writing, and also collaborate. That's all for today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing any questions you might have.
Can I maybe come in on one of the points that David made, which is really important? This idea of making sure you do these activities with students who are interested. It's something that we found that it was a struggle initially with schools to convince them that really they should select students who are particularly interested in languages rather than giving us an entire class. And when we did it and we showed the teachers and we showed the schools, that is something that really hit home for us and for the schools, I think. And David is right that that means that you get people with enough of the level of language. So we had to pick a particular age group in Ireland, and it would be the same in each country. Every country would have that particular point in the school system that it would be good to do this. So immediately before they do their final exams, but after they've developed enough language skills, because we found that 1 year in school made a huge difference. So if we got them too early, they wouldn't have enough, and it meant that they couldn't engage, as David is saying, with the playful element, with the problem solving, if they didn't have enough confidence. But a lot of this was about, I've already responded in the chat, a lot of this was about giving them confidence and showing them that they had more ability than they thought they did. Because I think students in general, it's not true of every country, but in general, I think Ireland and Malta suffer from this, that it's this idea that they don't have enough confidence in their linguistic ability. They don't realise how much they actually have. And I'm talking of people who are interested in languages, not of general student bodies. But does anybody have a question for us?
I actually also wanted to add something to what Eimear is saying, because there's obviously a lot. I actually had wanted this project to be for children, but then it turned out when I found my academic collaborators who were able to guide me a bit, they told me that 16, 17 was more of a reasonable age, since they would have more maturity to think about it. But I'm still intrigued by the idea of children translating, even though that would be a logistical nightmare. So that would be something that would need to happen in schools. But since Malta is a bilingual country, people have to translate all the time. So I'm sure that many of you who speak 2 languages or more and who are brought up speaking 2 languages or more have always had this translation going on inside their minds. And it was certainly the case for me growing up, speaking Maltese and English. And what I wanted to do in this case was taking this muscle, this translation muscle that had already been used for a number of years, and training it and informing it with research methods, with a bit of more of a critical angle. And so I think that in bilingual countries such as Malta, perhaps even Finland, for example, could be an interesting case for this. It's more of a fertile ground because students already have a strong grasp on at least 2 languages.
And I see some questions coming in there.
In my case, Armando, were there any practical professionals or just academics? In our case, the presentation was given by people who practice as translators. Some of them happened to be academics, but the focus was the practice of translation, how we approach different texts.
Okay, I'm just
So,
just to be aware of the time. We have 4 more minutes, so please, if you can give quick answers, if you can.
yeah. So we would have done both, where we had the university lecturers explaining what the courses were that they had on offer and the different types of courses, what were contained in them. And then we had the translators explaining the translation, giving people a chance to try it, and then looking at the different careers. And just on the jobs there, what job roles, especially within the EU, the focus on languages, there are so many different ones. I mean, there are the 5 linguistic ones, the translation, interpreting, lawyer linguist, the proofreading, and the linguistic assistants as well. But there are also jobs like ours. I mean, I'm not a translator. So communication, where you need all of these languages, and we have them across all of the policy areas. So many different ways of doing it. I personally believe that we can combine the fun in these workshops with the showing them how they could go travel the world and have jobs with languages. So I come up from a slightly different perspective to David's. What this is about is having different ways of looking at it.
Regarding, I'm addressing now Carla's question, what job, as well as regarding language and culture policies and planning. It is not something that DGT deals with that much. As field officers, as kind of represent DGT in local communities and language communities, we do have a bit more of an input, but it's not really an input. It's more of a relationship with language planning and so on. It's not a very direct kind of not in terms of language planning. We don't get into that. So that is normally a matter of competency for the member states, as opposed to.
But there are I suppose the Director General for Education and Culture, the Director General for Communication, the different policy areas within the EU. You would have a lot of engagement and projects, and of course DG Translation as well, that we would have a lot of projects where we engage with governments and with, as we said in both of our presentations, with partners and universities to try and support and multiply, I suppose, what is being done. But there are many different ways of approaching careers like this.
As regards internships, we have the Blue Book traineeships, which open twice a year, which start in March and October, and DGT translation internships are available too.
Okay, great. Thank you both for these answers and, of course, presentation. Maybe we wait a little bit more if there are any other question.
Great to see a former Blue Book trainee there. The network is quite big.
I guess the message I would like to leave people with, that is, translation is fun. So I think it's good to remember when reaching out to students that translation is a game at the end of the day. So it's good to keep that in mind and try to transmit that to young people as much as we can.
Great. I think this is a great thought to finish our morning session. I would just add, not only translation is fun, but languages can be fun. So let's continue in that spirit throughout the day and throughout the rest of the Translating Europe Forum. I thank everyone, especially Eimear and David, for this great presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, everyone. And of course, I thank everyone that took your time this morning to listen to this. And I wish everyone great continuation of day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mate.